feels pretty good, but get ready for tomorrow. For the students in the class, you were handed a rubric, but you didn't know that. You were handed a rubric. Please hold on to this and attach it to your first response. We wanted you to have it before you hand it in your paper so that you could understand how we will go about assessing your work. In the future, we'll attach one to it, but for this time, we wanted you to have it ahead of time so that you can make some decisions about how you wanted to write your response paper, which is due on Tuesday. Hopefully some of you Thursday. I'm sorry. Thank you for the correction, Kelly. Hopefully some of you have started on your paper already. I want to remind you that on Thursday at 5 o'clock, sections meeting at 5 and 6 will be meeting in Carson 68. Sections that meet at 4 o'clock are more than welcome to come. We urge you to do that. And that Bernard often is going to share his experiences just this past October at Auschwitz. And you remember Bernard from last week. He was one of the survivors who spoke to us. So that's 5 o'clock, Carson 68. For my sections, which meet at 5 and at 6, I will be taking attendance, so you want to make sure that you're there. I wanted to reiterate to you that one of the agreements that we had with Northlight Books was that because the publisher of War and Genocide was providing the hardback book at the paperback price, that you would be charged for the paperback. It came to my attention in my section fairly early that a very sharp student, I don't remember who it was exactly, said, there you go. No, you one who did it, said, I thought we were supposed to be charged for the paperback price. And indeed, because of barcodes, you were indeed charged the hardback price. I contacted the owner of Northlight, who said that she was not aware that that had happened. She went and checked and found, in fact, that each one of you who bought your book there paid $2.50 too much for the book. At which point we agreed in my section that $2.50 in and of itself was, half a latte or half a, mochaccino or whatever. But that collectively, $2.50 amongst over 100 students could make a sizable difference to the children of Rwanda. And so the owner of Northlight Books has offered to give us back $2.50 for every receipt that we can give her. I know some of you probably haven't saved it. I know some of you have. Tim has a bowl that we will be passing today. If you have a receipt, please feel free, if you have it with you, to put it in there. If not, some loose change might help. We are starting today with our effort to collect money for the orphans of Rwanda. And Tim has a couple of words he wants to say about the sociology club.
We decided to start up the sociology club again this year. And essentially we have nothing planned, but we're going to start planning things. So if you want to come, it's Thursday, Stevenson 2091. You don't have to be a social major. You don't have to commit. We're going to have lunch. If you want some pizza, just stop by. We're exploring things like workshops on grad school and careers in social work and raising money for various causes. So come by. 2091 Stevenson.
Thank you. Anyway, would you start the bowl moving? If you have, as I say, if you have your receipt now, if not, bring it to section on Thursday. If you can find it underneath all the dirty clothes.
Myrna, there's a question here.
Yes. I'm sorry, yes.
What time was the meeting?
Oh,
What
it's
time?
at noon. I'm sorry.
At noon.
Noon.
Yes,
The other one that we don't have received today?
we're going to collect them up until we have everybody tapped out and everybody has brought their receipt. So you don't need to have it today, but bring it to section, okay? Thanks.
What about a photocopy receipt for that one? Because I have to give my parents.
You have to give your parents receipts, so
So they'll be.
could you give them a photocopy?
They yelled at me last year for it.
They did?
Yeah.
Talk to me afterwards and I'll give you my phone number. Or maybe you can give me your parents' phone. But talk to me. I don't know whether she'll accept photocopy. Any other questions? Okay. I wanted to take just a moment of your time and see whether anybody comes from Petaluma to the lectures. We have someone who would like to have a ride. An older person who is not driving, I believe, who would like to have a ride to some of the lectures. So if you would see me afterwards, if you might be able to give someone a ride, that would be most helpful and good. I'm going to ask Joel Newberg to come up and introduce our speaker. Joel is the immediate past president of the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust at Sonoma State and has done an awful lot of good work for us and knows our speaker quite well. So, Joel.
Michael Taylor was in a small town in eastern Poland when World War II broke out in September of 1939. He was, fortunately for him, in the Soviet zone of Poland. That changed in June of 1941 when the Nazis invaded that part of Poland. His town that he lived in eventually was converted into a ghetto. And on the 12th of June 1943, the Germans killed, or did what they thought was kill the last of the Jews in a town that had been approximately 40% I think Jewish. They didn't kill Michael Thaler or his parents. He survived the war. He got the beginning of his education in a DP camp in German, which would have been his third language. He was counting. He came to Canada at the age of 14 and started high school in English, which would have been his fifth language. He is probably the best writer I know in the English language. So I can only imagine what his Polish is like. He went to medical school. He had a distinguished career as a pediatrician and professor at UCSF in San Francisco. He was for 12 years the president of the Holocaust Center of Northern California in San Francisco. In his 50s, he decided that he was going to become a historian, and he went back to school and got a master's in medical history. He has read everything of importance written in a number of languages about the Holocaust, and he's going to speak to you today about the myth of racism in the Holocaust. Thank you.
I must say it got better every year.
Meaning shorter, believe it or not. First, I have an announcement, housekeeping announcement. The fellow in the parking lot, whose name is Andrew, said that I must tell Professor Goodman how efficient and helpful he was. So that's not number one. And also, Myrna is recovering from shock because this is, I guess, my fifth, sixth lecture in a row each year. And each year I come a little later and a little less, more out of breath, breathing heavily. And this year I actually came early. And that's because I came from Berkeley. And I thought it would take about as long from Berkeley as it does from San Francisco. But it turns out that the bridges were straight and all that, and I actually took the right turn, which is amazing. And it just mentioned that before I came from Berkeley because I was speaking with some eminent historians there, and we went to lunch, and the person in the faculty club, a young woman, Asian background, heard us talking about something, and I said, well, I have to leave because I have to give a lecture. And she said, what's your lecture on? And I said, genocide. And she said, can I come? And I said, why? And she said, because the topic interests me. And I said, well, let's do some market research here. Why should a topic like genocide interest someone who's obviously never come near anything like a genocide? And she said, well, because I have all these relatives and they have friends, and sooner or later they start talking about their past, and there seems to be a genocide in everybody's past in a certain age. And I said, well, let's keep it that way. And basically, it occurred to me as I was driving back that as I've been teaching and talking about this topic, this is what, your 22nd year or 21st or 21st? And I remember way back when there were these discussions about this course, and it was all about Holocaust, and certainly that was the only genocide on the horizon. And then over the past 20 years, for some reason, every year we add another genocide to our list, either ongoing genocides or past genocides that we now retrospectively recognize as genocides. And that's a very interesting phenomenon, and that makes it sort of a, what shall I say, a contemporary issue of the kind that isn't just going away, because obviously if one really wants to and looks at the definition of genocide, let's say, framed by the United Nations in, 47 or somewhere, a convention, the Geneva Convention of Genocide, at that time there were only 2 or 3 that might have sort of conformed to that definition. But now, as I said, I teach 2 courses actually at UC Santa Cruz at the Department of History there, 3 courses. But the one course used to be or is the topic of my lecture here. It's a complete quarter course, 15 or 18 or 20 or whatever it is lectures. But and I always sort of try to summarize it here in one, which has to do with the racial biology, that racist biology that Joe introduced. I think what's the top? It has something to do with the title of the lecture, but in any case, it has to do with the fact that the ideology of the Nazi political system, if you will, was really rooted and founded and rationalized and authorized by what I would consider legitimate bioscience coming out of the 19th century, but used in a way which revealed for the first time the dangers in what's called modernity, and in utilizing the powers of science, the powers of this kind of knowledge, for purposes which are ideological, political, social, cultural, whatever. And so this is really the subtext of my talk, of my course there, and this is what I generally talk about when I come here. The second, however, course is called 20th Century Genocides, and I teach it with another fellow, and his name is Patrick Hogan, Thomas Patrick Hogan, and the deal was that I would not teach the Holocaust, he would. Because he's Irish, of course, and I had had enough of teaching the Holocaust, and anyway, I wanted a fresh mind on this topic, and so he teaches the Holocaust, and I teach the Armenians, and he teaches Rwanda, and I teach Balkans, and so on and so forth. But the reason we cut off at 20th century is because, in fact, we both believe, though after some discussion, that the nature of the so-called genocide crime, which of course you probably all know wasn't defined until after World War II by a fellow named Lemkin, who invented the term to specifically describe Holocaust, the Holocaust, what we now call the Holocaust, the final solution to the Jewish question. And so we both agree that before the 20th century, whatever would have passed for a genocide was qualitatively and quantitatively. Most people will agree about the quantitative, but qualitatively different. And the difference is that genocide in the past, before the 20th century, before the modern era, was basically an extension of war. For instance, if you look at Genghis Khan or somebody like that, he had a policy of destroying the villages and towns and habitations of his enemy, but then actually killing everybody. And that was an extension of wartime, because if you kill everybody, their children and grandchildren are going to have this memory and come back and bite you, 50 years or 100 years later. And secondly, you can take over all of their property completely without any strings or without any costs. And thirdly, it's a very effective way to ensure victory. So it was just an extension of wartime, basically. And there was no distinction, really. Sometimes they kept the menfolk for slave labor, sometimes they kept the women for whatever reason. But fundamentally, it was like total war for those who can carry it off. By the way, you didn't need any weapons of mass destruction to achieve that, and Genghis Khan had destroyed quite a few communities completely. They're just gone. They're extinct. In any case, in the 20th century, a new phenomenon that is related to the 20th century, which is the nation state, the technology I mentioned, the whole organization of civilized life, creates another dimension of the scope of what is possible. Okay, I mean, you can kill a lot of people in an awful hurry. And secondly, the rationale. And the rationale simply arises out of the nature of the nation state. The nation state, which is a construction, that term beloved by sociologists, construction of politics, of society, that requires that it be sovereign. And therefore it be safe and sovereign, and all else becomes secondary, and this is continuing to this day. And so what happens is that for whatever reason, when the state, meaning the governing powers of that state, decide that they're threatened either internally or externally, or that they want to construct a new kind of state that will ensure their security and their control and so on, then their ideology turns toward genocidal possibilities or potentials. Okay? You can stop me at any time, because those of you who heard me before know that I just free associate all over the place. So fundamentally, the issue then becomes if that's true, if this genocide thing or phenomenon or event or behavior is really inherent in the structure of organized society and not necessarily Western throughout the world, then perhaps there's no cure, so to speak. Now I'm speaking like a doctor. No cure. Cure is a four-letter word, and in medicine particularly. And fundamentally, maybe we're getting into an area which is so inherently connected with the human condition that there really isn't much we can do about it except perhaps ameliorate it, reduce it, contain it, prevent it in some way which is sort of secondary, distract it, whatever. But actually, we have, let's say, to continue the medical metaphor, a chronic, basically incurable disease that is associated with just being human, and therefore we have to learn to live with it, quote unquote. And learning to live with a disease, like a doctor telling a patient, means that we'll do everything we can to lessen your pain, to keep you reasonably functional, to etc. To extend your life expectancy, all of those things that can get you around the fact that you actually can't cure a disease, you can't eliminate it. Now, thinking about it that way, you just mentioned that one of your texts, as I said, I'm free associating, is War and Genocide, right? War and Genocide. Okay, think about that, war and genocide. Now, normally we just sort of separate those two. War, there's such a thing as just war, a la World War II. There is an unjust war, a la whatever, Vietnam if you like, take your pick, I don't care. But war in our minds is separate, because war is also a phenomenon of sovereignty, a phenomenon of the nation state. All of those issues that I just mentioned are sort of foundational for genocide, can also be, in a way, made to fit the concept of war. The thing that Tom and I have been discussing and trying to figure out whether we want to teach a course or not on war and genocide is that it may turn out, and probably I could make a hell of a strong case for it, that the only real effective way to control genocide is war. And that's the fundamental dilemma. Because the people who commit genocide are people generally who we call dictators, or what the political scientists more and more are calling failed states, who have nothing else to offer their people except this idea of an external threat, of constantly being under siege. 1984, Orwell, that whole story. And fundamentally, these people know one thing. They know that their base, their existence is based on armed force. That's military force. That's what the dictatorship, when you boil it all down, a dictatorship is essentially a political structure dependent on military strength, fundamentally. So fundamentally, if this kind of this kind of a structure, this kind of a state, if you will, decides to become aggressive for its own reasons, to ensure its control, etc., that move it in the direction of what we now call genocide, then essentially, by definition, talking to them, sanctioning them, diplomacy as it's called, is just simply not going to work, because they know very well how to deal with that. They hope that you will engage in that kind of discussion, because in fact, their power is based on something else altogether. Just like Stalin, who was going to take over Eastern Europe and was told that all those countries like mine, Poland and so on, are going to rise up in arms, and because they're all Catholics, and because communism is a different ideology, and they're never going to be controlled. And Stalin simply said, how many divisions does the Pope have? That's a famous question, okay? And that sort of gets to the heart of what a man like Stalin was thinking about in terms of controlling the world. Now, or controlling his position. Another obvious example just flew into my head, and that's the question of the Armenian Genocide. Do you teach the Armenian Genocide? Well, this book here, which all of you should be familiar with or will be familiar with. This is Samantha Power's book, won the Pulitzer Prize last year for nonfiction. It's not a brilliant book. The fact that it got the Pulitzer Prize is because genocide is hot. And this is a title called A Problem from Hell. Okay? And in this book, there is a situation where basically she lists all of the so-called genocides, small genocides, big genocides, and so on, and posits the question, and this is in the subtitle, America and the Age of Genocide. And that's very interesting. I use this, we use it, Tom and I use this text as the basic text for our 20th Century Genocide course. And the thing is that when you look at this book and you go down the list of all the genocides she deals with, all the way up to almost the present, fundamentally what it boils down to is America in the Age of Genocide, we should have intervened and we didn't. Every single case. Now, first of all, as a former European and a Canadian and so on, I think it's a very America-centric book, because the implication is that only America can do anything about genocide in the world, and also that it is our responsibility, because of our superpower status, to do it. Now, this young lady is at the same time struggling with the problem of Iraq today, because she is a young lady, she's a very attractive young lady, actually. She runs the Kennedy Center for Democracy, I think, at Harvard, but she's actually a journalist, fundamentally a journalist. And so fundamentally, in here is a chapter, a large chapter, on the Kurds, on what Saddam Hussein did to the Kurds. You know, gassing them for over 120,000 killed or something like that, probably still counting. And again, fitting in the whole story behind the scenes, the background story of all of the discussions with the European countries, with the Reagan administration, with the need for proof of gassing, and so on and so forth. And fundamentally, there was one man named Galsworthy who, not Galsworthy, what's his, you know, the economist from Harvard? Galbraith. His son, Galbraith's son. You know, was one of these guys in loose cannon, I guess, in the State Department, and actually who was a Senate aide for Senator Claiborne Pell. In any case, he and a couple of others who visited the area at the time realized what was going on and started to push hard on getting a bill through, you know, a sanctions bill, which came to the floor, which in its original form was called the bill against, I think, something like genocide or something. But anyway, so nobody thought about it twice. But then when they went home and started to hear from the companies from what is now in the current political year called special interests, and then all of a sudden they got back and they started to worry about the fact that so many billions of dollars of wheat gets exported to Iraq, and so many technical gadgets are being bought, and the oil issue, and what about the other Arab states, and so on and so forth. Sound familiar? Well, in any case, when they got back, after, by the way, Iran and Iraq had finished that endless, terrible war and had signed an armistice in August 1988, then, after that, Saddam Hussein felt free to finish with the Kurds and began to really go in and destroy entire communities of Kurds and push them out into the desert or into the mountains or toward wherever. And so what happened that was after the war that he felt free, because he felt that the United States was not going to do anything about it, since the United States was supporting him during the war against Iran, which you've heard about, I'm sure. So you see, it gets very complicated and very messy. And here is the very author of this, whom you might even hear from next year or something, who is now struggling with the issue, with the fact that here is this guy who is a genocidal killer, who got away with it at the time because the United States wouldn't stand up and be counted. And now that what's happened has happened, how do we deal with it? So I just want to throw this at you because it's very easy to talk about the past. And I speak as a Holocaust survivor. It's very easy. The past is so comforting because it'll never happen again. And in fact, you know, that reminds me, why do we study history? Again, another flash. Why do we study history? I mean, I'm a historian. I gave up a career in science in order to become a historian. So what the hell? Why do we study history? The past is gone. The past is baloney. Why? Well, presumably, it says that history repeats itself. It also says that cliche that I got to hate when I was president of the Holocaust Center, because every talk I gave would be preceded by some guy saying, oh yes, you remember, those who forget the past are condemned to relive it. Well, that's an absurd thing to say in the first place. But because, in fact, if history repeats itself, then logic says, why study it? It's going to happen anyway. It just repeats itself. What's the point? Okay? So then you can become a Marxist. Marx said, yeah, sure. History repeats itself. First as tragedy, which we study, and second as farce. It's a very interesting thing to say. Farce means that you're not going to learn anything anyway. It becomes farcical. You know, Charlie Chaplin goes down the street and he falls through a manhole, and that's funny, but not very. But then the next morning, he's going down the same street and everybody's holding their breath, and sure enough, he falls through the same manhole again, and everybody just explodes laughing. Because the second time, it's farce. Okay? And the point is that what can we really learn from the past? And I tell you what we can learn from the past, I think. What we can learn from the past is what we want to learn from the past. What is accessible, as I call it. Okay? We have a certain idea of life and where our safety is and where we sit is where we stand and all these issues of how we feel comfortable in our world and secure in our world. And so what we do, since the only textbook we have is the past, all that record, is we go and look for the things that support our position today and ignore those things contextually that were not there, okay, that are not there today. That's the problem. So in other words, look at the topic we're studying. There are two world wars, right? World War I, which was a disaster for Germany. It was a disaster anyway for everybody. I mean, the French lost an entire generation. The Russians they suffered a complete breakdown in their hierarchic system and developed the communist story, 1917. I mean, everywhere you look, it had these dramatic effects, but nothing like in Germany. I mean, the whole German world fell apart, not only the Kaiser and that whole structure, but their economy, their 100 years of industrial development went to hell. They ended up, with the world's worst inflation that anybody's ever seen. They ended up with failed experiments like the Democratic Republic of Weimar. They ended up with the largest unemployment the world has ever seen, with reparations to their ancient enemies, the French and the British and so on and so forth. So, and they are supposedly very smart people. I mean, they were advanced people. They're the most technically advanced, the most cultured in a way people, civilized people, if you will, in the Western world. So what do you think they learned from that experience of World War I? What? Well, you might say rationally, if history has lessons to teach, they would have learned not to do it again that way, that this is not the way to solve problems, going to war and taking the chance of destroying your whole, the whole state falling apart and infrastructure and all those big words, just ending your whole, putting in jeopardy your whole existence. They might have learned that, but they didn't. What they learned is how to do it right the second time. That's what they learned, okay? So it's a real issue about what we learn from history, and I think finally, to give it some more reason than just simply to pick out what we want from the past record in order to support our present position, there is something else, and that is not addressed to those people who look like me, the gray beards, but really to the young people. And the young people, each generation is unique. You've heard this, okay? It is true, because for what I said, history changes all the time. The world changes all the time. The context changes all the time. And therefore, you're born into a context that has never happened before, has never occurred before. And so that's why historians are still in business after all these thousands of years, because each generation actually has to recast, re-examine, if you will, reanalyze and relearn that record, that past. And that's legitimate, because you really have to learn things for yourself, since no other generation can really teach you, because no other generation goes through your corridor, your experience. You really have to learn it yourself. And that's why each generation has to go back to the books, and why new historians come up and rewrite the history according to those questions that become pertinent in this generation that may not have been pertinent in another generation. Okay? And that's really, take a thing like slavery. Well, the word slavery is a big word, and it keeps changing the context all the time. I am now discussing actually today I was supposed to meet with the dean of UCSC, UC Santa Cruz, because I had proposed a new course, a course on Tibet. When I was a medical scientist, I actually did some interesting things, and one of them was to do some research in Tibet. And basically, I thought about Tibet, now that I'm thinking about genocide, as a new kind, yet another kind of genocide that is arising on the horizon that I can see, and that's cultural genocide. Okay? And of course, Tibet comes immediately to mind. And I could see that because I was there. And I interacted with those people, and it's a fascinating story. Again, not as simple as it seems. Not that I have anything good to say about the Chinese and what they're doing to the Tibetans. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is modernity. The real issue is that this is a unique, almost, situation where you've got this culture of 2, 3, 4,000 years frozen in ice behind these mountains that are essentially inaccessible from any direction. And they have this ancient way of living, of values, of everything that you can imagine. I mean, in some of the villages, they still take people who die and tear them apart in pieces and take them up to the highest mountain so that the birds of prey can feast on the flesh, because that's what the old beliefs are, okay? Well, you say, oh, well, okay, but, then the stuff comes in. Who are you to tell them, blah, blah, blah. So the point is that when the young generation, which now there is almost a second young generation under the Chinese, because I think Tibet was finally occupied in 1954, fundamentally these guys, the smartest and the brightest, to use the cliche, go off to China if they want to learn how to be doctors, like the people I worked with, or lawyers, or anything modern, right? They go to China. They actually marry there most of the time because it's like 10 years. And then they come back and they become the middle class and the professional class of Tibet. How do you think those people are going to accommodate, let's say, the Chinese one day just disappear? And how do you think these people who are very similar to you in some ways, they're products of the modern age, how do you think they're going to deal with this whole system of monasteries and monks and this weird kind of ancient kind of culture that has absolutely no connection whatsoever with building roads and introducing modern medicine, etc., 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 leaping over a 2,000-year hiatus? That's the really interesting question. And then you have this sort of a whole new variant of cultural genocide, and that's what excites me. Because all of a sudden the context has changed. And in Tibet, 1954 was one thing, 2004 is another thing, and that generation of Tibetans will have to go back to the history books, have to go back to what they're doing themselves, what their values are, and fundamentally recast the whole thing in some way, because they are the future. They are going to be the next. I remember being invited, I think it's pertinent, being invited by a physician, Tibetan woman physician. When you go there and you sit in these sort of very typical Chinese-style cheap furniture, but very Western, and on the wall there's the Mao picture, and on the other side is the Dalai Lama of the Chinese. The Chinese have appointed their own Dalai Lama, so it's not the one that the jolly fellow, But and fundamentally, you're like in any apartment, any place, in in a sort of a Western-oriented world. And then, you have to go through these innumerable toasts and drinking their so-called tea, which is unbelievably disgusting. And fundamentally, when you get real happy after the 15th toast of what essentially is vodka, they beckon you upstairs. And you go upstairs, and it's Tibet. I mean, there's no furniture. There's just these thick carpets, and there's some carved wooden furniture. And in the corner, there's an altar, like a little icon of the Buddhist type, with the real Dalai Lama's picture over it, and you can see that they're burning incense and they're practicing whatever the hell they're practicing. So I say and they all speak English because they've been trained, like in medicine you have to study English because those are the textbooks and everything. So I remember I say to her, you're a modern doctor, do you believe in that stuff? And she says, no, meaning. And I say, so why are you lighting the incense and the candles and stuff? And she says, it is necessary. Now, that is an amazing thing to say, because she is saying, I don't personally believe in the existence of a Buddha and a God and all this stuff. I'm a product of a communist culture. But I have to preserve my identity and my history and my culture. And I, as a sort of non-observant Jew, I'm totally in line with this, Basically, I don't believe that all of these rituals and the 613 laws of the halacha, the Jewish law, have particular meaning. But the tradition, the whole cultural connection, I feel as much part of it and a product of it as any Orthodox Jew, and therefore it is necessary, okay? So it's a complex idea, but for the Tibetan, young Tibetan, this is another issue. And so all of this is tied up together with this genocide issue and the war issue. And if you want to save the Tibetans, you have to fight a war with China. And we're not about to do that. And there is no way in hell they're going to be freed otherwise. Okay? You've got to come to terms with that. All right? So the connection between war and genocide, I think, is 2 of the 5 major problems for that generation that's sitting out there. For me, from where I sit, okay, looking backwards. War and genocide. The tension between them, the tie between them, there's a lot written, hundreds of books on war crimes and peace and crimes against peace and crimes against humanity and genocidal crimes and all the distinctions between them, all the gradations and all that. It's all contextual. Now, so I mentioned war, genocide. Okay. The second thing, the third and fourth, I think, is the issue I already sort of suggested, which is also linked at the hip with this first 2, and that's sovereignty versus globalization. Now, obviously, we talk a big deal about globalization and outsourcing. This is going to be the big thing, the big issue in this election, I'm sure. Trade, outsourcing, loss of jobs. I mean, I don't have to tell you. Everything you say this year, everybody lines up this way or that way. Talk about context. I mean, if I just want to say something about the Vietnam War now, I better watch myself, because pretty soon I'll be characterized or typecast as Democrat or Republican. Right, race. Okay, I'm racing through it. So fundamentally, where was I? Okay, so sovereignty and globalization are also major head-on collisions. Think about the United Nations, and that's got to do with race and genocide. The United Nations are supposedly the Supreme Court place where all the nations get together, the community of nations, I believe it's called. But in fact, especially these days when there is only one power, as I had begun, one nation state, that can actually do anything in the world, and can actually not only has the responsibility, but everybody expects them. I was driving here about the Haiti thing that's going on right now. And I've been hearing on NPR these discussions. And one guy says, well, the United States has got to come in and change things because it's their fault in the first place. And I'm thinking, so which side is he talking about? Is he Aristide or the rebels? Well, it turns out that he's on the Aristide side. Another program is saying the same thing, that, we have to come in on the rebel side because we armed them and we paid them and all this stuff. And so here you are, both sides fighting this fight over Haiti is expecting us to come in on their side, or at least to come in and do something. All right? And the same is true of the Middle East with the wall and the map. And I mean, everywhere you look, it's clear that the United States are the only power that can do anything. And that the others expect it to. And then they can turn around and shoot at us. Because, of course, nobody's ever going to be satisfied in this situation. And what is the United Nations, in fact? In that situation where the United Nations has no army and no power and no real means of expressing its will, what happens is that they are basically a club for protecting sovereignty. Protecting Saddam Hussein's right to kill all the people he wants, because we do not want to, undermine the idea that every nation is independent and they can do what they want. Okay, fine, I'm all for it. But that's still an issue that's going to have to be resolved, because globalization, whether we like it or they like it or not, is going to, internet, the whole thing, is going to be pushing against that. It's 2 forces pushing it. Those are the 4 things. The 5th thing, if you like, is environment. And we're going to stop there because I have to go on to race. Okay? Now, I brought some books. I wanted to get this through to you because this is a course on genocides. And it's very universalized now. And this is where the universal aspect of it comes in, not just the Holocaust, okay? This is really where the rubber hits the road, and each of you, has to decide where the hell you stand on this, okay? Because it is not something, like the waitress in Berkeley said, it's something that concerns her directly or indirectly, okay? So now, this is the book, A Problem from Hell. America and the Age of Genocide. And other things that, okay, Rethinking the Holocaust, which you may have or may not. I don't know if that's a text that you've used, but it is from a friend of mine, Yehuda Bauer, and probably the foremost scholar in the Holocaust today. And it has in it some issues about genocide and Holocaust and comparisons, and it's a set of philosophical essays, essentially, that I think is worth pursuing. And that reminds me why I brought it. I'll be teaching a course here in Sonoma, starting, I guess, next month sometime, for the LLI, Lifelong Learning Institute. And and I stole this title from Yehuda Bauer, Rethinking the Holocaust, but he said it's okay. So I will be teaching that on Tuesdays, I think, for the next 8 weeks. So that's a plug for that. And then the other two things that in my race part of the talk, one is called racial hygiene. I don't know if you have Proctor, but you see, one of the issues about these genocides as you hop along like a rabbit from one to the other is that each is different. So these discussions of what's unique, is the Holocaust unique, is it different from the other, every one is different. And that, of course, does not simplify the issue, it makes it harder. It makes it, like a doctor again, harder to make a diagnosis. Okay? So this is a wonderful book. Again, a friend of mine, Proctor, and this is another text that I use in this other course. So I'm teaching these two courses, Bioscience and Holocaust, if you will, and that's the main text. And the other one I mentioned, 20th Century Genocide, and that's the main text. And along with Against the Origins of Nazi Genocide. Wonderful title for this course. The Origins of Nazi Genocide is by Henry Friedlander, who's a very good historian of medicine, and basically covers this idea, this topic of from euthanasia to the final solution, which I'll be talking about. And finally, backing up for the broad background of this race issue and the biology of race and so on, is a book by Daniel Kevles, who's now professor, used to be Caltech, maybe Caltech still. Anyway, In the Name of Eugenics, it's called. And fundamentally, it talks about the universal background to the whole concept of how bioscience can improve the human race, fundamentally. Okay. Now, let me start very quickly by, I had a control gizmo, which I can no longer find. What did I do with it? Just a moment. Here it is. And I'm supposed to point it at that. Okay, let's see. This should be on, and this, it's dead. Okay, it just turned itself off. Now I know what it thinks of my lecture. Okay, now I should do this. Well, play. It isn't projecting, is it? I better stop.
International jurist Raphael Lemkin for the word genocide. He originated the idea of outlawing extermination of human groups in 1933. Lemkin constructed the word
stop
genocide.
It, okay. And you need to heat it up. Okay. Okay, basically what this is a few small clips put together to make a few points about this business of genocide, race, and so on. Actually, genocide in terms of wrapping up what I was saying about the unique, they're all different, they're all unique, they have an underlying...
En daar een actiegroep leidt tegen de Israëlische bezetting van de Palestijnse gebieden.
No, you gotta move it forward.
De ambassadeur is op het matje geroepen bij het Zweedse ministerie van Buitenlandse Zaken.
No, you
het leek een aardige vernissage te worden.
You gotta move it forward. Okay. Can't I do this for...
I do have to say that I'm...
No. Can't I do it from here? Okay, I'm doing it. What happened now? No, did it go backwards? See, I never trust these things. For good reason. Now, I'm pressing this, and you're also pressing it. Does it... No, we need to get through this part. I don't want that part.
21.
is it rewinding?
Het openen.
No, it's still that lady. I don't want her. Pardon? Okay. I knew it was my fault. All right, it doesn't matter. The point is that
You should understand. You should understand.
forward, please.
It's Raphael Lemkin
Okay,
for the
good.
word
Perfect.
genocide. He originated the idea of outlawing extermination of human groups in 1933. Lemkin constructed the word genocide from the Greek word genos, meaning race or tribe, and the Latin suffix cide, meaning to kill.
The Genocide Convention itself goes pretty far towards limiting definition in excluding social groups, excluding destruction that is cultural destruction. But in our common morality, and also in the Geneva laws, one finds that there's much more attention to the destruction of a people that comes about through the destruction of their cultural objects, through the destruction of their places of worship. Do we want to put that at the same level as the destruction of a people who happen to be born as Jewish, as happen to be born as Tutsi, as Hutu? I don't know. I can't say. Myself personally, I want to retain that moral outrage at what is genocide, and I have trouble with the legal definition and the insistence on the various on the various categories that come and the fine lines that are drawn.
Here now is the history of genocide, from the Bible to present day.
The Genocide Convention of 1948 defines genocide as an action or intent to action to annihilate a group as such, an ethnic, national, racial, or religious. And this definition is used by politicians today. It's the only definition that we have. It was reached as a result of horse trading between powers in 1948. It was not the result of any academic discussion.
Around 70 people of my direct family were butchered, among which uncles, cousins, aunts, nieces, nephews, and so on. They were all killed, butchered, massacred in the same way, tied in pieces by machetes and thrown in mass graves.
169 million civilians were killed between 1900 and 1987 by governments and political organizations. 169 million civilians. That includes disarmed prisoners of war. It does not include 34 million soldiers who died in all the wars of the 20th century until 87. So 4 times as many civilians were killed as soldiers. That is the extent of the problem we face.
If you begin that, let us say, lice are unhealthy, then you exterminate the lice.
The Congress was still reeling from what had happened in Somalia, that I was desperately trying to convince the Europeans and many in my own in Congress, Republicans and Democrats, that we should go into Bosnia, where there were already 250,000 deaths and 2.5 million refugees. And I think most people thought that that was more than the traffic could bear. And by the time they finally, I sort of started focusing on this and seeing the news reports coming out of it, it was too late to do anything about it. And I feel terrible about it because I think we could have sent 5,000-10,000 troops here and saved a couple 100,000 lives. I think we could have saved about half of them. And after that, I established something called the Africa Crisis Response Initiative, where we went into Western Africa primarily and trained the militaries that had a certain level of competence in peacekeeping work. It enabled the Nigerians and others, for example, to aggressively move into Sierra Leone. They did a lot of things that has saved some lives, but I will always regret that Rwanda thing. I will always feel terrible about it, just like I'll always be proud of what we did in Bosnia and Somalia and Kosovo and Haiti and Northern Ireland and the Middle East. I just missed it until it was too late. By the time I figured it out, it would have taken us another month to deploy troops there, and they'd all been gone anyway.
Thank you. Denise?
Mr. President, oftentimes I hear people
What?
Thank you for being so understanding, man.
No, I don't think I stopped it, but okay. You need to, okay, right here. There. Please power off, yes. So now what? Okay. Anyway, I wanted you to see the complexity and the American context and problems with the administration, with the president now saying it's the one thing he is really ashamed of in his whole democratic presidency, that he did not intervene with 10,000 American soldiers to save somewhere between, I guess he said about 200,000, but actually probably around 400,000, because then he corrected himself as maybe we could have saved half of them. And the latest figures suggest what? 800,000 were killed in Rwanda. So, but it is also a good introduction to the what I supposedly came here to talk about, which is one of the fundamental ways in which genocide can be rationalized, and that is the racial way. And here was as close as you can get in a modern genocide outside of the Holocaust is Rwanda as a racial, or if you will, tribal genocide, which in a sense is biological as much as economic, okay? So I want to now go back to this formal part of my talk and suggest that this has deep roots like all of these other things. Could I have that blue off somehow? Because I will need to project. Ah, perfect, I did it. Okay. Didn't work the first time. So yeah, but how do I know?
It'll just come on again.
So what's the point?
If you don't turn blue, you're okay.
All right. Well, blue is not good. Anyway, so this particular issue here is the race issue. Now, you know, it's very fashionable to talk about these days that there's no such thing as race. In fact, Yoda Bauer, in correspondence we've had, by the way, they just completed 2 weeks ago the Forum on Prevention on Genocide, and you ought to get into the website. It was just held in Sweden, and it was represented by 60 countries, and Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, made a new proposal on how to deal with genocide, and Yehuda Bauer was the main sort of scholar on the committee to organize this whole thing, and we've been going back and forth on this. And fundamentally, one of the fundamental issues is diagnosis. In other words, how can we prevent it if we don't know what's happening, or how can we pick it up before it happens, and so on. Almost like a medical thing. Well, what I want to show you is the roots of at least this one rationale for committing the genocide that is sort of the prototype genocide of this course and most courses, and that is the Holocaust, which is the quintessential racist genocide, because it is literally based on a concept of race, which means who you are is who you were born, your blood, whatever, your ancestry, your biological origins are really what makes you who you are. Underneath that idea, of course, is the fundamental scientific Darwinist idea that says that heredity counts. Heredity is how we inherited who we are. that basically environment is very secondary. And in fact, environment cannot correct to any significant extent if our heredity in some major way is deficient, such as inheriting some terrible disease or inheriting mental retardation or whatever. It's very difficult then, using environmental approaches, to reverse that. In other words, you have to be made of silk to be a silken purse and whatever. So that's the concept. There is another concept, which is, of course, a more modern and more, what shall I say, ergometric concept, which is that, no, give me a baby at birth, and if I can do what I want to, educate him any way I want to, I will turn him into an Einstein, which is that the environment is really what's important, and heredity isn't all that important. Well, this is still an unresolved issue, as you can imagine, but fundamentally, the major two new ideologies of the 20th century were based on two different interpretations of this Darwinian question. Okay? Communism said, everybody's equal, workers of the world unite, all we have to do is get rid of the class system, get rid of the capitalist system, get rid of the exploitation of the poor, and basically everybody will be just fine because we will manipulate the environment in such a way that everybody will be comfortable and happy. And we have to get rid of the old explanations, mythology, religion is the opium of the people, etc. That's the environmentally based concept. Somebody called Lamarck, who explained Darwin's findings in terms of adaptation to environment. Therefore, the environment counts. Your beak is round and not sharp because the environment shaped it that way. So the environment can explain evolution, right? It's adaptation, survival of the fittest. Okay, the other side is the fact that, in fact, mutations is what makes us into species, and mutations is how a beak gets round and not sharp. And it is the DNA of the bird with the round beak that gets transmitted, and therefore the subspecies has round beaks. And therefore, and none of this has anything to do with the environment. What the environment does in the Darwinian system is it promotes certain mutations, so that if at one end of the island there are soft berries, then round-beaked babies have an easier way to get at the juice, whereas on the other end of the island there will be hard berries, and therefore babies with sharp beaks will be able to pierce those berries and get the juice, and therefore at one end of the island the progeny of round-beaked will be selected, and on the other side will be the sharp-beaked, but it has actually no environment itself as such has no mechanistic role to play. It couldn't create these changes unless there was a mutation that allowed it to happen, okay? And the mutation itself is incidental. It's entirely due to chance. Okay, a quick course in modern genetics, okay. So if you think about that, then fascism or Nazism was essentially the other ideology that said blood is everything. Heredity is everything. We Germans have been contaminated by outside inferior DNA, if you will, in terms of today, including gypsies, including Jews, including lower classes that, intermarried and bred like rabbits and produced all this offspring that can't handle anything, especially in the modern world. And therefore, we're going to be building, according to modern science, the healthiest, the strongest, the most productive, the most efficient, the most superior, literally superior country, nation, people in the world. That's the Nazi story. Okay? So you have this clash between the communist concept of environment über alles, and you have the race concept, meaning you are what your blood makes you, okay? What your heredity makes you. Where did this come from? Well, I already suggested it comes from sort of the high-tech, the highest reaches of medical science or biological science, and in fact, mostly in the early years in America. So just very quickly, now let's see how much time I have. I have time. Okay, so now we have a conference on race betterment. Now, it's not racist, it's race. And in those days, the language, again, context changes, language changes. Race at that time meant human race. One race, human race. In other words, a synonym for species, human species. How do we better the human species? We have this new science that the scientists have been cranking out over the past 50 years that gives us an understanding of how heredity works and how we transmit positive and negative types of qualities, right? And note the date, January 1914, just, 6, 7, 8 months before World War I, and where? Battle Creek, Michigan. And who can tell me what the hell is Battle Creek, Michigan? What? Anybody? What? Cereal. What is it? Kellogg's. Exactly. I'm forgetting already. Kellogg's. Right. Kellogg was a man who made a hell of a lot of money with this industrial stuff and, selling agricultural products and Rice Krispies and so on, whatever. Any case, he had a foundation, Race Betterment Foundation. To this day, there is a Kellogg Foundation, by the way. And at that time, it was like the best thing you can do is to spend your money trying to improve the lot of the human race. And at that conference, Booker T. Washington was one of the main speakers, and his point was, if any race or group of people deserves and needs betterment in terms of conditions, in terms of opportunities, in terms of improving their capabilities, it's my race, those people who just came from slavery. That was his argument. So it wasn't the negative spin that we would give today. It was a very positive spin. It was literally a medical, scientific attempt at that age, just before World War I, to improve by using medicine, by using new knowledge, to improve the lot of humanity at large. And you see, you have fast forwarding, again, still staying in America. You have the cover of a Congress which took place in 1932. I selected this because the dates are interesting. This is just 1 year before Hitler came to power. And you see this is a Eugenics Congress announcement, history and purpose of, Third International Eugenics Congress. And look at this cover, eugenics. It represents the new science of eugenics. I don't have time to go into eugenics and what it is and all that. Let me just say that whenever you see the letters EU, that's good, because it comes from the Greek for good. So euthanasia is good, eulogy is good, right? Eugenics is good. I'm sure there are other, in medicine, euthyroid means normal thyroid, and so on. So you see EU means good. Euthanasia means good death, right? So eugenics is good genetics. And this was the science of precisely how to use the new knowledge to improve, to make better babies, if you will, which is exactly what we're doing today with that knowledge, because we now have it, actually. So fundamentally, look at what it is. It's this big tree with roots in every other field of knowledge. It's a synthesis of everything human beings have ever figured out. And there is heredity, there is genetics, there is mental testing, anthropology, law, statistics, etc., etc. What does that remind you of? What is that a symbol of? That tree. Tree. Tree of life, yes. Or better, tree of knowledge. Right? So what is this saying? It's saying this is our new religion. This is what's going to replace the old Genesis story, right? Adam and Eve, apple, tree, knowledge, life. That's the new religion. You have to get into the context of that period to understand the power of this, okay? So now, for the first time, we have the capability to really do something about all those unfortunate babies with the water heads and all those retarded people and all that stuff. We can do something, okay? Well, that leads to pretty much a science of this kind, which tries to figure out what causes these problems that can be diagnosed and treated. So here is a paper for a man named Davenport, who I could go on forever. He was the leading eugenicist or geneticist of America at the time, and he did studies like Hubble-type source of defectives. Well, what does that mean, Hubble? Can someone give me a contemporary, what's the word, synonym? Hubble. A hovel is like a shack or like a cave-like dwelling, a hovel, right? Homeless. Thank you. So he was studying the homeless population to see why the hell they were so inadequate, so outside society, so impossible to integrate, to see if the new science could do something for them and for society. So what does he find? He finds in this family incest, you see, in the second generation, incest, and as a result, then there is further incest in the next generation. The baby of this is then, I guess, abused or whatever, has sexual intercourse with the father, and then you have this result. And you can't read all this, but basically you have in this one family tree epilepsy, sex offender, feeble-minded, criminal, and alcoholic. Those are still today the major social ills. And what he is saying is that these people in the hovel, in the homeless situation, are there. West Side Story has a line, something like, it's an issue of he's depraved because he's deprived. In other words, he is that way because he's been deprived. That's the communist, if you will, socialist explanation. Or he's deprived because he's depraved, because he doesn't know how to handle his life, and therefore he's down there on the street. Okay? That continues to be the discussion about the homeless. And there is the new science telling you that your social ills and therefore state ills, political ills, national ills, can now be approached scientifically and perhaps solved. Okay? Good enough. That's what we're doing today, by the way. It's a whole other lecture. But basically, they didn't yet have the power of the techniques. So, okay. But in America, this led to such things as involuntary sterilization, for example. Well, what do you do? How do you do it? Well, you've made the diagnosis. You've got these people, like in that family. How do you stop them from propagating and continuing this very undesirable line of offspring? And there have been there were studies of the day showing how one family can produce 415 offspring, of whom 20% are prostitutes, 30% are criminals, 20% are alcohol, etc. And it can show that the state of New York over the previous 4 generations spent like an unbelievable sum, like $1 million, which at that time was like $1 billion, just taking care of these people, for example. So how do you do it? You put laws on your books, on every state, starting with Iowa in 1907, I believe, that says that if such a couple wants to get married and they have this inherited trait, then they have to be sterilized. They cannot be legally married unless they're sterilized. Okay? Now this was challenged down the line, 1927. That's pretty far down the line, after World War II, certainly. World War I, sorry. And this came to a very, very famous case, Buck versus Bell. It got to the Supreme Court of the United States. This young couple want to get married, but they want to have children, and they challenged the law. And the Supreme Court rendered its opinion against the couple, for the state. That if they wanted to get married, they would only could get married legally if they were sterilized. And, interesting, here is the most famous paragraph from the majority opinion, written by no less than Oliver Wendell Holmes. Nobody's conservative, mind you. Okay? And this is the famous line. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. You understand? Imbecile, by the way, is another one of those words that have changed meaning. If I call you an imbecile, it's a sort of an insult. But imbecile at that time was actually derived from the IQ test of that time. And if you were below a certain level of IQ, you were an imbecile. And if you were a little higher, you were a moron. And if you were even higher than that, you were an idiot. Really, those were the 3 categories of below the level. Okay. So when he's saying imbecile, it's probably the lowest. Okay. I don't remember which is which, but those terms have changed completely. But that's what he's saying. But to me, even more interesting is here. This is the issue of race and using science, biology, for construction of social ideologies, in fact, or social legal structures or whatever. And here it is. It is better for the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or let them starve for their imbecility, incompetence, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. Okay, he's making a case for involuntary sterilization. But the next line, the principle that sustains compulsory vaccination, think about vaccination, is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. There you are. Okay. What happens here? Well, you know that the Industrial Revolution could not have been possible without vaccination. Vaccination was this huge new discovery that blocked the spread of epidemics that used to kill all the workforce and made the Industrial Revolution possible. Vaccination was this huge triumph of modern biology and medical science. It prevents disease, it stops it from spreading. I mean, smallpox alone used to kill 5% of the entire population of Europe every 10 years or less. Right? So he's using this triumph of vaccination, preventive medicine, and making the analogy with cutting the fallopian tubes, preventing, in the same way, the spread of this other kind, the genetic disease. Okay? Now, that is an example of how you can use this powerful instrument, science, modern science, that really works, as shown by the stopping of the epidemics and making the Industrial Revolution go, in terms of an entirely different structure and a different construction, equating cutting the fallopian tubes and preventing a woman from ever having a baby with vaccination. That's the leap. Okay? To them, Oliver Wendell Holmes made perfect sense. Okay? But it never went very far in America, and that's also interesting. Eventually, these laws started to be challenged more and more, and as the 30s started there, basically they started to disappear off the books. And the last one, I think, was 1938, just before World War II. And in fact, California was in the lead, by the way, in the numbers of sterilized people. There were probably 30,000 or more people sterilized just in California. Which is way ahead of everybody else. Okay, there's been books written about that, so don't bother me with that. But anyway, the point is that it took off also in Germany in its own context. Post-World War I, remember this whole disaster and how they're looking for ways of reorganizing their society and moving forward and trying to explain away their total defeat. You know, well, here is basically what these sciences were doing over a period of, starting with 1900 here, going all the way, and this is 1933, right here. So you see there's already been a gradual increase in these sciences, which are genetics, anthropology, and something called racial hygiene and eugenics. In Germany, eugenics was called racial hygiene. That in itself is interesting. Because hygiene, of course, is the term borrowed from controlling infectious diseases, right? Cleaning up the water supply and the air and so on. They've learned that bugs cause disease, and therefore hygiene was the big thing. And now they're looking at race, in other words, genes, exactly the same way. Cleaning up the polluted gene pool. And so racial hygiene in Germany always had a slightly more racist spin than it did in England or in America. Okay? So, but you can see that in 33, when Hitler comes to power, there's this explosion of this science all over in all the universities. You can't have a medical course. Your father had to, your father, who was a medical student at the time, had to take Rassenhygiene as a standard subject in medical school, right? Of course I saw it in your father's medical record, which you were kind enough to lend me. Okay, anyway, and this was, of course, reinforced by studies. This is in German, but here it's in English, showing, in fact, that certain, not only diseases, but actually tendencies toward disease were inherited by studying identical twins. Okay, this is ein-eiget, Zwillinge, zwei-eiget. These are fraternal twins, unidentical, identical. And you can see that, for instance, if one of these identical twins developed tuberculosis, the other one had a very high chance of developing it too, whereas unbiologically related twins only had a 50-50 chance. So all the way down the line, these are extremely important social kind of things. For instance, here, criminality, Schwachsinn, which means mental retardation, schizophrenia, all of these socially important problems, he is showing, have a strong hereditary component. right? And we know that now, because in fact we can say, yes, the tuberculosis can be explained by the fact that the immune system is an inherited system, and obviously an identical twin will have the same immunity as the other one, and therefore will be more or less resistant to whatever disease, right? Makes sense. But that was the finding. So you see, it gave the background to this kind of thing. This is from a speech by a Nazi, the new rector of the University of Vienna Medical School, which is the second most prestigious school in the German-speaking world after Berlin, right? So in 1938, if you remember your history, Hitler took over Austria, Anschluss, and all of this became part of the Third Reich of the Nazi Empire, and now everybody was dismissed, and only and new people were put in, Nazis, of course. So here is from the speech of the new what would be the equivalent? The new dean of the medical school in Vienna. And here, these lines, now he's addressing his new faculty, his whole faculty, and he's saying, we are in a new world now. We can do things that we could never do before. And what are they? Well, knowledge which in the past were pursued mainly for the sake of pure theoretical science, all these doctors and scientists in their laboratories, mostly Jews, by the way, never really worked for the people because they were never applying this, but now we will apply it. We'll now find application in matters of daily life. We physicians are called upon here and now to join in the decision-making process. In other words, we're the experts. We really know how to deal with these issues. We're the doctors. And therefore, for the first time, this government will not only follow our advice, but we will be part of we will have power, real power. We will be part of the decision-making process. Even if many errors were committed in the past, the new state gives us the means for correcting those missteps and to pursue what is in our own interest. Now, for the first time ever, this triumphalist statement, for the first time ever, we have the possibility of bringing the ancient Greek injunctions to their fullest realization. You don't know what the hell he's talking about, but I can tell you what. He is talking about the Hippocratic Oath. The Greek injunctions are the Hippocratic Oath which every medical student takes to do no harm, right? And what he's saying is that as far as he's concerned, the new medicine, the new Nazi-style medicine, actually makes it possible for the first time ever to actually comply and promote what Hippocrates was saying. He's turning it upside down. He's making himself the ethical doctor. How? Because he says the purpose of caring for the individual is to sustain the people as a whole. This is one of the issues of Nazism. It regards the individual as part of a larger whole, which is an organic, a biological entity, an organism called Volkskörper, the body of the nation. Literally the way we say the body politic, right? Well, that's sort of weak and left over from the 17th century in English, but very strong and literal in German. The body of the nation, we are all part of it. We are particles of the body of the nation. So the greatest thing a doctor can do is be concerned not so much with the individual as we do, but as a part of the larger body of the nation. Okay? And so, with this goal before us, our social consciousness, which is all that political and Nazi ideology that we're getting now into our young people, the new social consciousness, and the legal guidelines, in other words, the Nuremberg laws about racial mixtures and so on, will enable us physicians to treat the living nation, Volkskörper, both in the positive sense of promoting the able-bodied, the talented, the useful, but also in the sense of eradicating the worthless and rotten. That's his speech. You are now the doctors to the nation. You are not the doctors to the individual. The only importance of the individual is what they can do for the nation, as part of the nation. We're all in this together. We Germans are going to rise and march together into this great future because every one of us will be conscious of this new ethic of being part of the larger whole. That's all you need to know about the Holocaust. If I stop right now, you can see where it's going. Because where it's going next, historically, is obvious. First, they're going to get rid of all those, they sterilize the people that they need to sterilize to get rid of all those people like in America. Except they're going to do it really good, like 400,000 people out of a nation of 50 million or something. Not like we, maybe 60, 70,000 out of a nation of 3 times as many, I guess. Secondly, they're going to proceed to get rid of the burdensome diseases, the chronically ill, the incapable, the unproductive. And here is the Darwinian solution. Here you have, and you'll have to flash or whatever. Okay, so here is Gegenauslese and here is Auslese. Well, selection and counter-selection, Darwinian, right? Counter-selection is we are blocking normal Darwinian selection because with our new abilities, our new drugs, our new treatments, we're actually saving the weak and those incapable of fighting our wars and producing our industries because they would be dying off before by Darwinian selection, but now we're saving them. And in fact, we're sending the strongest and the brightest to go off and fight in our wars, and they're all going to die. And what's going to happen to the nation? All those retards and imbeciles are going to be breeding like crazy. You see the logic here. So fundamentally they're saying, this is your choice, this or that. And this is 1939, and of course June 1939 is what? When the war in a couple of months. So there, and also under the influence, remember the 1936 Olympics, you can see this is the new nation, the new Germany. Military strength, athletic strength, all of those good things. And this is what the old regime and the old sort of touchy-feely government was producing. This is the choice, the new Darwinian choice. Okay? So that's what you have. And fundamentally then, very quickly, you have this ladder, which goes Darwinian selection, subspecies, not, in other words, in Darwinian terms, it's not the finch with the round beak, but his progeny and the subspecies that counts. It's never the individual that's important. Secondly, you have Darwinian survival, competition. And then thirdly, you have human societies behave like subspecies. That means social Darwinism. Society is like a natural environment for a species. They fight each other, right? And the stronger one wins. But society is like a race in a way. It's like a species, I should say. A society is like a species. So the two societies fight each other, and one species wins over the other. Human societies behave like subspecies or races. Racial hygiene, the German variant, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. You just saw that. It makes sense. And just like Oliver Wendell Holmes. And finally, control nurture and manipulate nature. You know, that's the cliche of the 19th century. Nature versus nurture, right? Nature is what you inherit, and nurture is what you get from your education and your food and whatever, your environment, right? And nature versus nurture is still a debate. Okay? But you see, what the Nazis said was, what's really important is to control, to manipulate nature, to manipulate it by killing off the undesirables and maintaining a strong pool of desirables. And then you can control nurture, of course, by making new laws. For instance, they were the first to ban smoking in the workplace. Interesting fact, 1936. We're still screwing around with that stuff. But anyway, so now I think, okay, now I can almost stop anywhere, but you have to flash. 5 more minutes. Okay. So what are the ideals? This is the ideal, the Aryan ideal. Okay. Gutes Blut, ewiger Quell. What does that mean? It means a lot. It means not only good blood is eternal joy, right? Did I translate that? Quell is a source. Exactly. It's a double meaning. Okay. You see this now. If you establish a superior people genetically, this is forever. It's forever. It's eternal source. Good blood is an eternal source of power because you've created a new species, if you will. Okay? That's the power of this. All right? So this is what they want. This is their ideal. That from now on, never again will Germany be defeated by some inferior race, because they have created this perpetual, ongoing source of power, where good babies make good mothers, and good mothers make good babies, etc. And this goes on and on. In contrast, this is taken from an SS doctor's manual, you have these heads. Well, notice, these are not heads that are very common in Germany at any time, right? I mean, here, this is obviously African, this is obviously Asian, etc. And this, by the way, looks very much like sort of a, you Caucasian criminal, basically. So fundamentally it says, nein, abermals nein, no, never, no, again, no. Denn diese sind nur ein Wurf nach dem Menschen hin. These are not humans. These are just sort of like caricatures or gross approximations of humans. And then it says to this doctor, wehe dem das vergisst. Woe unto the doctor or the person who forgets that. Okay? This is the real natural enemy to us now, because those are the ones who pollute our gene pool. But they're really not present in Germany. This is from the colonial period, in Namibia or whatever. But these guys are, and they are the real danger amongst us. Okay? And this is so characteristic Judaic nose, according to their representation. And it says, das Gesicht des auserwählten Volkes. There is this mixture of ancient prejudice, anti-Semitism, religion. What does this mean? It means this is the typical face of the quote-unquote chosen people, which is, of course, a religious reference, anti-Christian, etc. And Mischlinge, wie sie der Jude propagiert. And this is how the mixtures, the Jewish, non-Jewish, Aryan mixtures look. Sie sind die ewig körperlich und seelisch unharmonischen Bastarde. Bastard, by the way, is another of those terms that have changed meaning. Bastard simply means half-breed. That's what the terminology was. Anyone of mixed race, okay, was called a bastard. Not in the sense that we use it now. It was simply the word for illegitimate, if you will. Illegitimate because of racial mixture, okay? So what does it say? It says, these are, again, ewig, forever, because race, body, biology, forever, the physical and spiritual unharmonisch. Not, disharmonic, disharmonious. In other words, they don't fit into the German soul and into the German body. They pollute our German Volkskörper, the body of our nation, okay? I mean, it's so literal. So these, like those blacks, but don't exist among us, but we've got to go after these, because their background, you can see the Asiatic background, and according to their scientists, or if you will, pseudoscientists, Jews were a mixture of African and Asian blood. So it was bad, because they inherited the worst of both, and then they were polluting our pool. Okay? And here is an example. Here is a poster for marriage from a book, a marriage manual. And here it says, Die Vererbung als erhaltende Macht. Again, that's the theme. The inheritance as permanent power. And here, of course, are the enemy. Here are the Aryan Greek classical figures. Here is this black lady from Africa. And here is the Jewess. And it says in actual scale to the bodies. And guess who this Jewess is? It's Rosa Luxemburg, the famous feminist communist leader of the World War I, or after World War I, who was very famous, feminist leader. And so you see, this combination appears all over the place. This connection with the inferior races. Now here is an example of a famous poster. How many of you have ever seen this before? Okay, a few have seen it. Okay, well, what does this say? It says, entartete Musik, which means degenerate music. Black guy playing a saxophone. But, okay, what's the connection? Whatever. They were all inferior races. They're all in the same boat. They're all the same thing. And this is, by the way, art. This is music. This is not just physical, all right? Because you inherit those skills also. You inherit Beethoven. You inherit Mozart. You inherit Goethe. You see? So, and you also inherit all the shrewdness and manipulation, and we have the specific laws, and who's a mixture, who's a bastard, and who's not, and what's allowed and what's not. And of course, we end up with huge genealogy record data banks where every German, you have an Ahnenerbe father's thing too, where they have written down there was a problem with one of your grandparents, I think. Forget it. I can tell you now. I can say, yeah, right. They have to go to Geneva to find out who his father was, you know. Anyway, okay. In here, it's interesting. Here is a poster from the Hitlerjugend, right? The Hitler Youth. Gesundheitsaktion der Hitlerjugend, health division or action for Hitlerjugend. And look what it says. It says, put out the cigarette, because du hast die Pflicht, gesund zu sein. You have the duty to be healthy because your body belongs to the nation. So don't you smoke. You're a Hitler Youth. Because your body is important to us. You're part of the nation. Okay? And here, of course, are all the characters that are the enemies of this new Aryan race. And you've got the Jew, and you've got the capitalist with whiskey, and you've got the Native American Indian, and the black, and the prostitute, and the dissipated intellectual. Looks like Woody Allen, doesn't he? Okay. And finally, this is another problem that we have to control, and that is that the inferior, the retards, if you will, breed twice as quickly as this wonderful Aryan profile that you saw before, and therefore we have to control that, because pretty soon you're going to have the average male criminal has almost 5 children. A criminal marriage, whatever that is, has four children. Basically, if you fast forward to a highly educated couple, they only have 1.9 children. And you can see where that's going. Okay. So finally, let's see if I can get this stuff out of here. Now forget I'm on television for the world. In the end, of course, if this projected over 120 years, everybody in Germany is going to be an imbecile. There is, of course, the economic side to it. And the economic side is very well put in this poster for the Nazi Party, which was in 1935. And it says the average German worker carries on his back 2 retarded people, mentally retarded people, who by the time they reach their 60th birthday will cost on the average of 50,000 Reichsmark, which was a lot. You can see the economics, and also in the educational field. These are all problems we have, as you well know. There's still election issues. And here you have the costs for a normal child, to educate a normal child. And here is special, exceptional child needs help. Here is for those who are either psychologically or in some way bildungsunfähig, geisteskranken. That's spiritually, like schizophrenics. Schizophrenics, basically. Psychotics. And here, blind or deaf, 10 times as much, more than 10 times as much. You see the costs, the economic costs. Remember, it's jobs, stupid. Okay? And now we have the euthanasia killing centers, because in 1939, 1940, it begins to, with this project while the war is going on, to go off and kill in these 6 different places precisely those people that the German worker was carrying on his back. And during the war, it expands to include slave laborers who are no longer useful. These are Polish names of laborers who are sent to be euthanized, meaning gassed to death. In these centers, these 6 centers where they're gassed and cremated, and you can see, because they all have tuberculosis. You see, it says here, Lungentuberkulose. And here it's interesting, mit Kind. This is a woman, Polish woman with a child also, who has tuberculosis and has to be destroyed. And fundamentally, you get the obvious transition to the final solution using exactly the same approach, the same methods, gassing, burning, concentrated in certain centers. And in fact, by 1941, for political reasons, they stopped the euthanasia program in Germany, and they transported the crews, the command, the directors, and the equipment, the installations from these 6 places, not all, but half of them anyway, and started the death camps of Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, the very first death camps of the of the Holocaust, of the final solution of the Jewish questions, literally were transported from Germany into Poland and established for the next phase of the cleanup jobs, what I call the public health program. So my speech should be subtitled, "The Holocaust as a Public Health Program," right? And I think that's about it. Here is the sort of indoctrination, of course, that went on. Here is the most common elementary school book that was obligatory in all the schools in Germany, and it was called Der Giftpilz, which means the poison mushroom. Guess who the poison mushroom is? Okay, and in there, little kids are instructed how to recognize a Jew. The Jew, it says, has a nose that looks like a backward 6, so that you can recognize a Jew physically. And, of course, the propaganda machine. This is Der Stürmer, which is a newspaper, a Nazi newspaper. It says, let's see, Germans read this newspaper, get clarity about the Jewish question. Die Rassenfrage ist der Schlüssel zur Weltgeschichte. The racial question is the key to the history of the world, to world history. The key. Okay, and this is based on 100-year-old sort of scientific philosophical by a Frenchman, Goodman, who said that if you look at the history of the world, it's all about races fighting each other, and the superior race wins. And of course, there's the obvious dehumanization of the Jew, equating, this is in my country, Żydivsze, which means Jews, lice, and it says typhus. So the Jew, the Orthodox Jew, blends into a skull with this louse, which carries typhus. So in other words, Jews are carriers of typhus, and they're no better than the lice that we destroy with what? With the disinfectant, with chemicals, and so on. And here it is in my other language, Ukrainian. This place has a lot of connections, right, with Sebastopol is a sister city, right? Okay. Anyway, so here it is. It says, Unikai Židiv, which means avoid Jews, and you can see the same, the Star of David, the skull, certain pattern. It comes out of the same Goebbels in Ministry of Propaganda. It is finally, this is my masterpiece for you. This is using literally the instruments, the powerful tools of modern science, the microscope, looking at the blood and seeing all of these things in the blood. And basically there, I think it says here in English, with his poison, the Jew destroys the sluggish blood of weaker peoples, so that a diagnosis arises of swift degeneration, which was a diagnosis, by the way, at that time. With us, however, the case is different. Our blood is pure and we're healthy. And now you understand how race, biology, science can be used to construct a powerful ideology for the modern era. Substituting for the old-fashioned religion, as you saw with the eugenics tree, and really creating an entirely new construct for postmodern life, if you will. So Holocaust, among other things, can be regarded as the first postmodern genocide as well. So it's many things. It's not just race. It's got the science in it. It's got the propaganda in it. It's got the hate speech in it. It's got everything in it. So it is the prototype genocide in that all other genocides contain partially elements that you can find altogether because it is such a modern genocide, and therefore it is continuously with us, because we are living in that era where we can go to a baby, we can take some embryos, we can pull out some DNA. We do it all the time now for, say, cystic fibrosis, right? We can pull out the gene for cystic fibrosis, we can throw away those embryos that are affected, and we can just keep the embryo that doesn't have that gene and propagate that. That's engineering. That's basically what they were trying to do. If they had those techniques now, they would have been using them too for this purpose, to develop this great, strong nation. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. All right.